A gang of ruthless bikers descends upon a serene mountain valley, their motorcycles shattering the peace as they chase and torment a majestic herd of wild Mustangs. Their cruel laughter echoes through the canyon as they scatter the terrified. Horses, but they didn't count on one thing: the battle-hardened veteran watching from the shadows and the stallion's unwavering spirit that would turn their game of torment into a lesson they'd never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thunder Ridge Sanctuary sprawled across the rugged Montana landscape, its vast meadows cradled by towering peaks that stretched toward the endless blue sky. The morning sun painted the grasslands in hues of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the territory where dozens of wild Mustangs roamed freely. Among them, a magnificent steel-gray stallion named Shadow moved with the power and grace of a born leader, his scarred hide telling tales of battles won and hardships overcome. At the edge of the property, retired Marine Corps veteran Jack Harrison stood on his weathered porch, his keen eyes scanning the horizon. His silver hair and lined face spoke of years of service, but it was his unwavering gaze that revealed the warrior within. After 3 tours in Afghanistan, Jack had found his peace here, transforming his family's old ranch into a sanctuary for wild Mustangs rescued from government roundups and worse fates. Shadow had been his first rescue, found trapped in an illegal snare 5 years ago, fighting with the same determination Jack had witnessed in his fellow Marines. The stallion's spirit had reminded Jack of his own struggles to find purpose after returning home, and together they had healed each other's invisible wounds. Now Shadow led the sanctuary's herd of 35 Mustangs, protecting them with the same fierce dedication that Jack had once shown to his unit. The sanctuary had become known throughout the region as a place of healing, where troubled veterans could find peace working with the wild horses. Jack's longtime friend and fellow veteran, Dr. Sarah Martinez, regularly brought her therapy groups to work with the Mustangs, helping soldiers battling PTSD find their way back to civilian life through the horses' quiet strength. This morning, however, something felt different. Jack's combat-honed instincts tingled as he noticed Shadow's unusual behavior. The stallion stood alert at the highest point of the meadow, his ears pricked forward, muscles tense beneath his gleaming coat. The rest of the herd had gathered close, sensing their leader's unease. The distant rumble reached Jack's ears before he saw anything, a sound that triggered memories of distant firefights and approaching danger. It grew louder, mechanical, and harsh, completely out of place in this peaceful valley. Shadow's trumpet of warning echoed across the sanctuary as 5 motorcycles roared into view, their riders dressed in black leather adorned with a distinctive emblem, a crimson skull wreathed in flames. The Devil's Hand MC had been making trouble across 3 counties, their reputation for violence and intimidation growing with each passing month. Jack had heard stories about them from Sheriff Kate Chen during her last visit, but he'd never expected them to venture this far into the mountains. The bikers spread out in a practiced formation, their machines cutting through the tall grass. As they approached the herd, their intentions became clear as they began to circle the Mustangs, engines revving, creating a tightening noose of noise and exhaust. The horses bunched together, their fear palpable as the gang pushed them toward the canyon's edge. Jack's hands clenched into fists as he watched Shadow plant himself between the bikers and his herd, the stallion's powerful frame radiating defiance. The gang's leader, a massive man with a shaved head and a skeleton tattoo crawling up his neck, gunned his engine directly at Shadow, forcing the stallion to rear and dodge. The other riders laughed, their cruel enjoyment of the horse's terror evident in their whoops and hollers. They didn't seem to care that they were on private property, or that their actions were causing genuine distress to the animals. To them, this was just entertainment, a way to kill time and assert their dominance over creatures they saw as beneath them. Jack moved silently toward his barn, his military training taking over as he assessed the situation. 5 armed men, likely dangerous, threatening his sanctuary and the horses he'd sworn to protect. He knew he needed to act, but he also knew the importance of strategy over brute force. As a Marine, he'd learned that the best victories came from outsmarting your opponent, not just outgunning them. Inside the barn, Jack reached for his phone, already forming a plan. These men had no idea who they were dealing with. Not just a rancher, but a decorated veteran with a network of fellow warriors who understood the meaning of loyalty and justice. As he dialed the first number, he could hear Shadow's defiant challenge ring out across the valley, a sound that spoke of courage and resistance in the face of cruelty. The game these bikers were playing was about to change, and Jack Harrison intended to make sure they learned a lesson they'd never forget about respecting life and property. But first, he needed to gather his own troops, because this was going to require the kind of precision and teamwork that only veterans could provide. In the barn's cool shadows, Jack's fingers moved swiftly across his phone screen, muscle memory from years of coordinating tactical operations guiding his actions. His first call went to Mike Thompson, a former Army Ranger who ran the local hardware store. Mike had served 2 tours in Iraq and shared Jack's passion for protecting the sanctuary's horses. "Mike, we've got trouble at Thunder Ridge. Devil's Hand MC, 5 of them harassing the herd." Jack's voice was calm, but carried the unmistakable edge of command. "How fast can you get here?" 10 minutes, Mike replied without hesitation, the sound of keys jingling in the background. "I'll bring the drone. We can get eyes on their positions." Jack's next call was to Dr. Sarah Martinez, who was already on her way to the sanctuary with 2 veterans from her therapy group. Her voice tightened when Jack described the situation. "We're 15 minutes out, Jack. Carlos and Dave are with me, both former Marines, solid under pressure." As Jack coordinated his response team, the sounds of engines and terrified horses filtered through the barn walls. He moved to the door, staying in the shadows as he observed the scene unfolding in his meadow. The gang had split the herd into smaller groups, their motorcycles weaving between the frightened animals with practiced precision. Their leader, the man with the skeleton tattoo, seemed to take particular pleasure in charging at Shadow, forcing the stallion to continuously dodge and retreat. Shadow's reactions, however, caught Jack's attention. The stallion wasn't just running scared, he was moving with purpose, keeping himself between the bikers and the most vulnerable members of the herd. Every time the gang tried to push the horses toward the canyon's edge, Shadow would appear, his powerful presence creating a barrier that even their motorcycles couldn't break. The sanctuary's security cameras captured everything, their feeds streaming to Jack's phone. He watched as one of the bikers, frustrated by Shadow's interference, pulled something from his jacket, a cattle prod. The sight made Jack's blood boil, but years of combat experience had taught him to channel anger into focused action. The sound of a truck engine approaching drew Jack's attention. Mike's red pickup appeared on the access road, moving quietly with its lights off. Jack watched as his friend parked behind the barn, out of sight from the meadow. Within minutes, Mike joined him, carrying a compact drone case and wearing the focused expression Jack remembered from their joint training exercises. "Got eyes on all 5, Mike reported, quickly assembling the drone. "Their bikes are all custom jobs, expensive. These aren't just random troublemakers, Jack. Devil's Hand has been expanding their territory, pushing into small towns across the state. They're sending a message." "Well, they picked the wrong place to make their point," Jack replied, watching as Mike launched the drone. The small aircraft rose silently into the morning sky, its camera providing a clear overhead view of the sanctuary. Through the drone's feed, they could see the full scope of the gang's activity. The bikers had formed a loose circle around a group of mares and foals, while their leader continued his aggressive pursuit of Shadow. The stallion was showing signs of fatigue, but his determination never wavered. "Sarah's 5 minutes out," Jack said, checking his phone. "We need to contain this situation before someone gets hurt, human or horse." Mike nodded, his fingers moving across the drone's controls. "These guys are organized, Jack. Look at their formation. They've done this before, probably been terrorizing ranches across the county." "Then it's time someone showed them what real organization looks like," Jack replied, his mind already formulating a strategy. Years of military service had taught him that superior numbers weren't always necessary. Proper planning and coordination could overcome any advantage. Through the barn door, they watched as Shadow suddenly changed tactics. Instead of merely defending, the Stallion began to move with more purpose, leading the gang's leader on a specific path. Jack recognized the pattern. Shadow was using the terrain to his advantage, drawing the biker toward the boggy section of the meadow where the ground was treacherous. "Smart horse," Mike murmured, adjusting the drone's position. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now, back to the story. He knows his territory. The sound of another vehicle approaching signaled Sarah's arrival. Her SUV parked next to Mike's truck, and she quickly emerged with Carlos and Dave, both men moving with the practiced efficiency of combat veterans. They joined Jack and Mike in the barn, quickly assessing the situation through the drone feed. 5 hostiles, multiple civilians at risk, Jack briefed them, falling naturally into tactical language. "We need to contain and discourage without escalating to violence. These men are trying to send a message. We're going to send one right back." The small group huddled around Jack, their diverse military experience coming together as they formulated a plan. Outside, Shadow continued his strategic retreat, drawing the gang deeper into the sanctuary's territory. The Stallion, despite his exhaustion, was proving to be as tactical in his resistance as any trained soldier. As they finalized their strategy, Jack looked at each face in turn, seeing the same determination he'd witnessed countless times on distant battlefields. These were men and women who understood the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, whether they walked on 2 legs or 4. "All right," Jack said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a natural leader. "Let's show these boys what happens when you mess with veterans and their horses." Jack's makeshift team moved with practiced precision, each member understanding their role without need for lengthy explanation. Sarah and Carlos took the eastern perimeter, while Dave positioned himself near the canyon edge. Mike kept the drone hovering silently overhead, providing real-time surveillance of the gang's movements. Meanwhile, Jack began implementing the first phase of their plan. The distant rumble of thunder provided perfect cover as Jack activated the sanctuary's irrigation system. Water began spraying across strategic sections of the meadow, creating muddy patches that would soon limit the bikers' mobility. It was a technique he'd learned in Afghanistan, controlling the battlefield. By manipulating the environment, through the drone's feed, they watched as Shadow continued his calculated retreat. The Stallion was showing remarkable intelligence, leading the gang's leader exactly where Jack had predicted. The massive biker, frustrated by his inability to corner the horse, didn't notice how the ground beneath his motorcycle was becoming increasingly unstable. "Target Alpha is approaching the bog," Mike's voice crackled through their radio earpieces. 3 minutes until he hits the soft spot. Secondary targets are splitting up, 2 heading north, 2 maintaining pressure on the herd. Jack watched as Sarah and Carlos began moving parallel to the 2 bikers heading north. Both veterans carried long ranch tools, harmless enough to avoid legal trouble, but substantial enough to make their presence known. They stayed just within the tree line, their movements silent and coordinated. The gang leader's shouts of frustration echoed across the meadow as Shadow led him through another series of turns. The Stallion's coat was dark with sweat, but his eyes remained bright and focused. Suddenly, the horse made a sharp turn around a cluster of rocks. The biker, intent on his pursuit, followed, and his motorcycle's front wheels sank deep into the boggy ground. The powerful machine's engine roared as its rider tried to power through, but this only caused the wheels to sink deeper. The other gang members, hearing their leader's angry curses, began to turn toward his position. This was exactly what Jack had been waiting for. "Execute Phase 2, Jack commanded into his radio. Immediately, Mike guided the drone lower, using its spotlight to illuminate the trapped biker. Simultaneously, the sanctuary's perimeter lights blazed to life, creating a disorienting wall of brightness around the meadow's edges. The sudden light show startled the remaining bikers, causing them to cluster together defensively. In their confusion, they failed to notice Dave and Carlos emerging from different directions, both men carrying long ranch poles and moving with military precision. Sarah positioned herself near the herd, her presence calming the frightened horses. Jack stepped out into the open, his stance relaxed but authoritative. Years of combat experience radiated from his bearing as he approached the group. "Gentlemen," his voice carried across the field, "you're trespassing on private property and harassing protected animals. I suggest you reconsider your choices." The gang leader, still struggling with his trapped motorcycle, snarled back, "You don't know who you're messing with, old man. This is Devil's Hand territory now." "Is it?" Jack replied calmly, nodding to Mike. The drone descended further, its camera clearly capturing the gang's faces and their bikes' license plates. "Because from where I stand, this looks like a clear case of criminal trespassing, animal abuse, and destruction of private property. All caught on camera and already uploaded to several secure servers." The other bikers shifted uneasily, noticing, for the first time, that they were surrounded, not by an overwhelming force, but by a handful of men and women who moved with the unmistakable confidence of trained warriors. Shadow, sensing the shift in power, trotted over to stand near Jack, his proud head held high despite his exhaustion. "You see," Jack continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, "Thunder Ridge isn't just a horse sanctuary, it's a place where veterans come to heal. The men and women you see around you, they've faced worse threats than a gang of bullies on motorcycles. We've served our country, and now we serve these horses." The gang members exchanged uncertain glances. Their usual intimidation tactics seemed less effective against opponents who had faced real combat. The leader, finally managing to extract his motorcycle from the bog, gunned his engine in a show of defiance, but the mud-covered machine only undermined his attempt at intimidation. "You have two choices," Jack announced, pointing to the drone still hovering overhead. "You can leave now, knowing we have evidence of everything you've done here, or you can escalate this situation and deal with not just us, but every law enforcement agency in a 100-mile radius. Your call." The tension hung in the air like the gathering storm clouds above. Shadow moved closer to Jack, the stallion's presence adding to the veteran's commanding aura. The other horses, sensing the shift in power, began to calm, gathering behind their leader with restored confidence. One of the younger gang members suddenly cut his engine. "Boss," he called out, "maybe we should just go. This ain't worth the heat." The leader's face contorted with rage, but as he looked around at the determined faces of Jack's team, something in his expression changed. Whether it was the realization that he was facing combat veterans rather than ordinary ranchers, or the understanding that his actions had been thoroughly documented, his bravado began to crack. The gang leader revved his engine one last time, a final act of defiance before barking orders to his men. "We're out, but this ain't over, old man." The other bikers quickly fell in line, their formations less coordinated now as they navigated around the wet patches Jack had created. Their retreat was hasty but controlled, each rider casting wary glances at the veterans positioned around them. As the gang disappeared down the access road, their motorcycle engines fading into the distance, Jack maintained his vigilant stance. Years of combat experience had taught him that the aftermath of a confrontation could be just as dangerous as the conflict itself. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon while speaking into his radio. "Mike, maintain aerial surveillance until they're completely clear of our perimeter." "Copy that," Mike responded, the drone humming softly overhead as it tracked the departing bikers. "They're taking the main road toward town. No signs of doubling back or splitting up." Sarah approached Jack, her medical training evident in the way she immediately began assessing Shadow for injuries. The stallion stood quietly, his breathing still heavy from the chase, but his eyes remained alert and proud. "He's exhausted, but doesn't appear to have any serious injuries," she reported, running her hands along the horse's legs, "though I'd like to monitor him for the next few hours." Carlos and Dave maintained their positions at the perimeter, their military training showing in their disciplined focus even after the immediate threat had passed. Jack nodded appreciatively at their continued vigilance. They understood that letting your guard down too quickly could be a fatal mistake. "Jack!" Mike called out, his voice tight with concern. "You need to see this footage." He approached with his tablet, showing clear images of the gang members' faces and their bikes' custom modifications. "These guys aren't just local troublemakers. I recognize some of these custom jobs. They're connected to a series of incidents across 3 states. Jack studied the footage carefully, his expression hardening. "Send copies to Sheriff Chen and your contact at the state police. We need to document everything before they have a chance to regroup or plan any retaliation." The rest of the herd was gradually returning to their normal grazing patterns, though they stayed closer to Shadow than usual. The stallion had proven himself not just as a herd leader, but as a tactical ally, his intelligence and courage matching that of the veterans who protected the sanctuary. "We need to upgrade our security," Jack said, addressing his team. "They may have backed down today, but groups like Devil's Hand don't take kindly to being humiliated. They'll try to save face somehow." Sarah nodded in agreement, still checking over the other horses. "I can reach out to some of our therapy program veterans. Many of them have security and surveillance experience. We could set up a rotation. Keep eyes on the property around the clock." "Good idea," Jack replied, watching as Shadow finally relaxed enough to drink from the nearby stream. "We should also consider installing more cameras and motion sensors along the perimeter. Mike, can you help with that?" "Already on it," Mike answered, typing on his tablet. "I've got some military-grade equipment that we can repurpose. Low profile, hard to detect or disable. We can have it up and running by tomorrow night." Dave approached the group, his rifle safely slung over his shoulder. "My brother works for the county surveyor's office. He can get us detailed maps of all the access points within a 10-mile radius. Help us identify potential approach routes and bottlenecks." Jack considered this information, his tactical mind already formulating long-term defensive strategies. The sanctuary wasn't just a retirement project anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance against bullies and criminals who thought they could prey on the defenseless. "We need to reach out to other ranches in the area," Carlos suggested, joining the conversation. "Create a network, share information. If Devil's Hand is expanding their territory, we won't be the last place they try to intimidate." The group spent the next hour securing the property and checking on all the horses. Shadow stayed close to Jack, as if understanding that their partnership had reached a new level. The stallion's actions during the confrontation had shown an intelligence and courage that reminded Jack of his most trusted squadmates. "You did good today, boy," Jack murmured, patting Shadow's neck. The horse nickered softly in response, his ears forward and alert despite his exhaustion. "But our work's just beginning." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the sanctuary, Jack gathered his team for a final briefing. The immediate crisis had passed, but they all understood that this was likely just the first skirmish in a longer conflict. The Devil's Hand MC had made a serious mistake in targeting Thunder Ridge Sanctuary. They had awakened a response they never expected, a brotherhood forged in combat and strengthened by purpose. "We'll set up rotating patrols starting tonight," Jack announced. "Two-person teams, 4-hour shifts. Sarah, can you coordinate with your therapy group veterans, the ones you trust most?" "Already sending messages," she confirmed. "We'll have enough volunteers to maintain 24/7 coverage." Indeed, as his team dispersed to their assigned tasks, Jack stood watching the peaceful scene before him. The horses grazed contentedly, Shadow standing guard over them, just as Jack and his fellow veterans stood guard over the sanctuary. It was a reminder of why he'd created this place, not just as a haven for rescued horses, but as a symbol of protection for all those who needed it. The following days at Thunder Ridge Sanctuary settled into a new rhythm, one balance between peaceful routine and vigilant preparation. Jack and his team worked tirelessly to strengthen their defenses, transforming the sanctuary into a fortress while maintaining its character as a place of healing. Mike's security upgrades were integrated seamlessly into the landscape. Cameras, disguised as bird boxes, motion sensors hidden in natural rock formations, and infrared detection systems that could track movement across the entire property. Shadow, having recovered from his encounter with the gang, seemed more attuned than ever to his role as the herd's protector. The Stallion had developed a habit of patrolling the perimeter alongside the veterans, his keen senses often alerting them to approaching vehicles or unusual sounds long before their technology could detect them. On this particular morning, Jack stood at his usual spot on the porch, coffee in hand, watching Shadow lead the herd through their morning grazing routine. Sarah's truck pulled up the drive, kicking up dust as she parked beside the barn. She wasn't scheduled for therapy sessions today, and the tension in her stride told Jack she brought news. "Sheriff Chen called," Sarah said without preamble, joining Jack on the porch. "Devil's Hand has been busy. 3 ranches hit in the past week, all within 50 miles. They're escalating, Jack, getting more aggressive." Jack's jaw tightened as he processed this information. Casualties? No human injuries, but they shot 2 horses at the Martinez Ranch. Pure intimidation. They're sending a message about what happens to those who resist them. Sarah's voice carried the controlled anger of someone who had seen too much suffering. "The sheriff's hands are tied, witnesses are too scared to testify, and evidence keeps disappearing from lockup." "They've got people on the inside," Jack concluded, his military experience recognizing the pattern. "This isn't just about territory anymore. They're building an operation." As if sensing the gravity of their conversation, Shadow approached the fence, his dark eyes fixed on Jack. The Stallion's scars caught the morning light, reminders of his own battles survived. "We need to be smart about this," Jack said, reaching out to stroke Shadow's nose. "We can't just defend. We need to understand what they're really after." Sarah nodded, pulling out her tablet. "I've been mapping their incidents," she said, showing Jack a detailed display of the region. "There's a pattern. Every ranch they've hit lies along major transportation routes, places where law enforcement presence is minimal, but access is good." "Smuggling corridors," Jack murmured, his combat experience connecting the dots. "They're not just expanding their territory, they're building infrastructure. The intimidation is just cover for something bigger." The sound of approaching motorcycles caused both veterans to tense, but it was just Carlos and Dave returning from their patrol. They quickly joined the conversation, adding their own observations to the growing picture. "We spotted fresh tire at tracks on the old logging road," Carlos reported, pointing to the western edge of the property. "Too new to be from their last visit. They're scouting us, looking for weak points." Dave unfolded a map he'd obtained from his brother at the surveyor's office. This whole area is riddled with old mining roads and forgotten trails, perfect for moving things or people without attracting attention. Thunder Ridge sits right in the middle of it all. Jack studied the map intently, his tactical mind seeing not just a sanctuary under threat, but a key position in a larger conflict. "They're not going to stop," he said finally, "not unless we change the game." Shadow suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward, staring intently at the northern ridge. Moments later, Mike's drone detected movement, a single motorcycle partially hidden by trees, its rider watching the sanctuary through binoculars. "They're getting bolder," Sarah observed, checking the drone's feed on her tablet, "or more desperate." Jack's expression hardened as he watched the motorcycle retreat into the trees. "We've been reactive, playing defense. That changes now. Mike," he called into his radio, "get everyone here, full team meeting in 30 minutes. As his team assembled in the barn, Jack laid out his thoughts. Devil's Hand isn't just targeting ranches. They're building a criminal network, using intimidation to clear their routes. We're not just protecting horses anymore. We're standing between them and their larger operation." "What's the play?" Mike asked, his drone footage displaying the latest surveillance data. "We use their playbook against them," Jack replied, his voice carrying the authority of countless combat missions. "They think they're dealing with a bunch of old veterans protecting some horses. Time to show them what that really means." The team huddled around the barn's central table, maps and surveillance photos spread out before them. Outside, Shadow stood watch over his herd, his powerful frame silhouetted against the morning sun. The Stallion's presence seemed to reinforce their purpose. This wasn't just about defending a sanctuary anymore. It was about standing against those who would prey on the vulnerable, whether they walked on 2 legs or 4. As Jack outlined his plan, each veteran added their own expertise, transforming their defensive position into something more dynamic. They weren't just going to wait for the next attack. They were going to take the fight to Devil's Hand, but in a way the gang would never expect. "Remember," Jack concluded, looking at each face around the table, "we're not just protecting Thunder Ridge. We're fighting for every ranch they've terrorized, every person they've intimidated, every animal they've hurt. It's time to remind them why you don't mess with veterans." Jack's plan began taking shape as the team gathered around their makeshift command center in the barn. Mike's extensive surveillance network had mapped out the gang's movement patterns, revealing a complex web of activity that stretched across the region. The veterans' combined experience in tactical operations proved invaluable as they analyzed the data, identifying patterns that civilian law enforcement might have missed. "Look here," Mike pointed to several marked locations on their digital map. "They're using these abandoned ranches as staging areas, small groups, 2 or 3 bikes at a time, rotating through on a regular schedule. Classic reconnaissance pattern." Sarah added her own observations, drawing from her therapy sessions with local veterans. "Some of my patients have reported unusual activity around their properties too. Mysterious phone calls, strangers asking questions about their land. Devil's Hand is gathering intelligence, preparing for something big." "They're not just expanding territory," Jack concluded, his finger tracing the network of routes they'd identified that are establishing a corridor. "These attacks on ranches aren't random. They're clearing a path, trying to secure a route that law enforcement won't notice." Carlos, who had been studying satellite imagery of the region, spoke up. "These old mining roads connect directly to major highways, but they're practically invisible unless you know where to look. Perfect for moving contraband." As they discussed strategy, Shadow's distinctive warning call rang out across the sanctuary. The Stallion had positioned himself on the ridge overlooking the main road, his keen senses alert to any approach. Through the barn's open door, they could see him standing, like a sentinel, his dark coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. "We need to move soon," Jack said, checking the time. "Sheriff Chen's intel suggests they're planning something major in the next few days. We have to disrupt their operation before they get fully established." The team gathered closer as Jack outlined the next phase of their plan. "Mike, your drone surveillance has confirmed their main staging area is at the old Peterson place. They think those abandoned buildings hide their activities, but they've actually given us the perfect opportunity." Sarah pulled up thermal imaging footage on her tablet. Night patrols show regular movement between midnight and 3 a.m. Small groups, but consistent. They're using it as a waypoint, probably for whatever they're smuggling through the area. "Here's how we play this," Jack continued, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a seasoned commander. "We're not going to confront them directly, that's what they expect. Instead, we're going to use their own tactics against them. Mike, those new surveillance packages ready?" Mike nodded, opening a case to reveal several compact devices. "Latest generation, military grade, multiple sensors, satellite uplink, completely autonomous. Once planted, they'll give us eyes and ears on everything that moves through that property. Carlos, Dave, you'll handle placement. Your experience in night operations makes you perfect for this. Sarah, coordinate with your contact at the state police. We need them ready to move when we give the signal, but they have to stay completely dark until then." The team spent the next hour refining their plan, each veteran contributing their specific expertise. They weren't just planning a defensive operation. They were preparing to systematically dismantle the Devil's Hand's entire regional network. As the sun began to set, Jack walked out to check on Shadow and the herd. The Stallion approached him at the fence, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand the gravity of their situation. "You've done your part, boy," Jack said softly, patting the horse's strong neck. "Now it's our turn." The sanctuary had grown quieter in recent days, the therapy sessions temporarily suspended while they dealt with the threat. But Jack knew that what they were doing now was just another form of protection, not just for the horses, but for every person and animal in the region who had suffered under the gang's intimidation. Sarah joined him at the fence, her expression thoughtful. "You know they'll retaliate when they realize what we're doing. They can't afford to look weak." "That's exactly what we're counting on," Jack replied, watching as Shadow returned to his herd. "They're used to bullying ranchers and civilians. They don't know how to handle opponents who understand tactical warfare." Udul. The evening air carried the promise of approaching rain, and with it, the perfect conditions for the first phase of their operation. Carlos and Dave were already preparing their gear, checking their non-lethal defensive equipment and communications systems. "One more thing," Jack addressed the team as they made their final preparations. "Remember, we're not just fighting for Thunder Ridge. We're fighting for every ranch they've terrorized, every person they've threatened. We do this right, we do it smart, and we do it in a way that ensures they can't hurt anyone else." The team nodded in understanding. They had all seen enough violence in their military careers. Now they would use that experience to protect their community, not through force, but through strategy and intelligence. As darkness fell over Thunder Ridge Sanctuary, Shadow's silhouette could still be seen on the ridgeline, standing guard over his herd. The Stallion's vigilance matched that of the veterans preparing to defend not just their sanctuary, but the entire region from those who would prey on the vulnerable. The first phase of their operation would begin tonight, and with it, the beginning of the end for Devil's Hand's reign of terror. Under the cover of darkness, Carlos and Dave moved like shadows through the dense undergrowth surrounding the old Peterson ranch. Their military training showed in every silent step, every calculated movement. The abandoned property had become Devil's Hand's primary staging area, but tonight that would change. Mike's drone provided overhead surveillance, its thermal imaging tracking all movement across the property. "Alpha team in position," Carlos whispered into his radio, his voice barely audible above the gentle rustle of leaves. They had positioned themselves near what appeared to be the gang's main approach route, hidden among the overgrown brush that had reclaimed much of the old ranch's perimeter. "Copy that, Alpha Team," Jack's steady voice replied through their earpieces. "Bravo Team, status?" "Bravo Team in position," Sarah responded from her location on the opposite side of the property. She and Mike had established a secondary observation post, their equipment ready to document everything that happened. The night was moonless, perfect for their operation. Thunder Ridge's therapy horses had been moved to the sanctuary's most secure paddocks, with Shadow standing guard. The Stallion's keen senses had already proven invaluable, detecting approaching vehicles long before they came into view. "Movement at the west entrance," Mike's voice crackled through the comms. 3 bikes, standard patrol pattern. Thermal signatures indicate they're carrying extra weight, likely supplies or contraband. Jack monitored the operation from their command center in the sanctuary's barn, multiple screens showing feeds from their surveillance network. "Remember the objective," he reminded his team. "We're here to gather intelligence, not engage. Let them show us their operation." The 3 motorcycles approached the old Peterson ranch house, their engines cutting through the night silence. The riders, confident in their isolation, didn't bother with stealth. They dismounted, beginning to unload what appeared to be heavy duffel bags from their bikes. Carlos carefully activated one of Mike's surveillance devices, its miniature cameras, and sensors beginning to record everything. The technology, far more sophisticated than anything the gang would expect, would provide irrefutable evidence of their activities. "Package 1 is hot," Carlos confirmed quietly. "Clear line of sight on the main building's entrance." Dave moved like a ghost through the shadows, placing a second device to cover the property's rear approach. Years of special operations experience guided his movements, making him practically invisible in the darkness. "Second package activated," Dave reported. "We've got eyes on their storage area." The gang members, oblivious to the surveillance, continued their work. Through the thermal imaging, the team could see them moving supplies into the old barn, their patterns suggesting this was a well-established routine. "Got vehicle movement on the access road," Mike suddenly announced. "Large truck approaching from the north. This is new." Jack leaned forward, studying the feeds intently. "This could be what we've been waiting for. All teams maintain position and record everything." The truck, a heavy-duty pickup with a covered bed, pulled into the property. 2 more motorcycles escorted it, their riders scanning the surroundings with far more professional attention than the previous group had shown. "These guys are different," Sarah observed through the comms. "Military bearing, organized movements. They're professionals." "Agreed," Jack responded, his experience allowing him to read the situation. "These aren't just gang members, they're hired muscle. Devil's Hand is working with someone bigger." The new arrivals began transferring items from the truck to the barn, their movements efficient and practiced. Through their surveillance equipment, the team captured clear images of faces, license plates, and the suspicious packages being moved. "Getting all this, Mike?" Jack asked, knowing the importance of documenting every detail. "Crystal clear," Mike confirmed. "Face recognition is already running. We'll know who these professionals are by morning." The operation continued for nearly 2 hours, the gang members and their professional associates working with methodical precision. Finally, the truck departed, followed by most of the motorcycles, leaving just 2 riders to stand guard. "Alpha Team, begin withdrawal," Jack ordered. "Bravo Team, maintain observation for another 30 minutes, then pull back." Carlos and Dave extracted themselves as silently as they had arrived, leaving behind the surveillance network that would continue gathering intelligence. Sarah and Mike held their position, documenting the property's return to its deceptively quiet state. Back at Thunder Ridge, Jack began reviewing the night's footage. The operation had confirmed his suspicions. Devil's Hand wasn't just a local gang causing trouble. They were part of something larger, more organized, and far more dangerous. "We've got them," Sarah said as the team regrouped in the barn. "Clear evidence of their operation, their professional connections, everything." "This is bigger than we thought," Jack replied, his expression grave. "They're not just clearing territory for themselves, they're setting up infrastructure for someone else, someone with resources and trained personnel." Shadow's warning call echoed across the sanctuary, followed by Mike's drone detecting movement on the access road. "We've got company," Mike announced, pulling up the feed. "2 bikes, coming in fast." The team moved quickly to their defensive positions, ready for whatever came next. Their successful intelligence-gathering operation had just raised the stakes significantly, and they all knew that Devil's Hand's response would be swift and aggressive. But this time, they were ready. The evidence they'd gathered would ensure that justice would be served one way or another. The approaching motorcycles roared up Thunder Ridge's main drive, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Jack and his team maintained their positions, watching through their surveillance network as the riders stopped short of the main barn. The gang members' body language spoke of urgency and agitation. Clearly, something had spooked them. "No," Sarah whispered through the radio. "Someone must have tipped them off about our surveillance." Jack watched from his concealed position as the 2 riders dismounted, their movements betraying their nervousness despite their attempts at bravado. They were younger members, not the hardened professionals they'd observed earlier at the Peterson place. Through the barn's hidden cameras, he could see them scanning the area, hands hovering near concealed weapons. "Thunder Ridge," one of them called out, his voice carrying a forced confidence. "We got a message from the boss. Says you've been poking around where you don't belong." Shadow's commanding presence suddenly drew their attention as the Stallion appeared on the ridge above them, his dark form silhouetted against the lightening sky. The horse's timing was perfect, almost as if he understood his role in their strategy. The gang members' attention split between watching the barn and keeping an eye on the imposing Stallion. "Mike, you getting this?" Jack murmured into his radio. "Every word," Mike confirmed from his position, running facial recognition. "These 2 are local boys, Tommy Chen and Marcus Riley. Small-time records, nothing serious until they joined Devil's Hand." Jack stepped out of the shadows, choosing his moment carefully. The gang members startled at his appearance, their hands instinctively moving toward their weapons before thinking better of it. Jack's calm demeanor and steady gaze made it clear he wasn't intimidated. "Your boss sent 2 rookies to deliver a message?" Jack's voice carried just the right mix of dismissal and amusement. "Must not be very important." The taller of the 2, Tommy, bristled at the insult. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, old man. What we saw at Peterson's, that wasn't just us. We've got connections now, serious people backing us." "Oh, we understand perfectly," Jack replied, taking a measured step forward. "We understand that Devil's Hand is just running errands for someone bigger. Tell me, does it bother you being errand boys? Taking orders from outsiders?" His words struck a nerve. Marcus, the younger one, shifted uncomfortably. "It ain't like that," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "No?" Jack pressed his advantage. "Then why are professional contractors running your operation? Why are you answering to people who aren't even part of your club?" Sarah's voice whispered in Jack's earpiece. "Their heart rates are elevated. Stress indicators high. They're conflicted, Jack. Push harder. You boys grew up around here, didn't you?" Jack continued, his tone shifting to something more conversational. "Tommy, your father runs the hardware store in town. Marcus, your sister teaches at the elementary school. What do you think they'd say about you helping outsiders set up shop in your hometown?" The mention of their families hit home. Both riders exchanged uncertain glances, their tough facade cracking slightly. Shadow chose that moment to move closer, his powerful presence adding to the pressure Jack was applying. "We're just following orders," Tommy said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "And those orders came from your club leadership, or from these new connections of yours?" Jack asked, knowing the answer from their expressions. "You're being used, boys. Your club, your reputation, it's all just cover for someone else's operation." Mike's voice came through the earpiece. "Movement on the perimeter, 3 more bikes approaching, fast. These ones are heavies, Jack." Jack maintained his calm facade, even as he heard his team quietly shifting positions around the property. "You've got about 2 minutes to make a choice," he told the young riders. "Those professionals you're working for, they're on their way here now. When they arrive, they're going to want to know why you're talking to me instead of delivering their message." The sound of approaching motorcycles grew louder, adding urgency to the moment. Tommy and Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between their loyalty to the club and the growing realization that they were in over their heads. "We can protect you," Jack offered quietly, "but you have to decide right now whose side you're really on, your communities or these outsiders who are using your club for their own purposes." The approaching bikes were nearly at the turn. Onto the sanctuary's drive, Shadow moved closer still, positioning himself between the young riders and the approaching threat, as if offering them a choice between 2 paths. Marcus broke first. "The shipments," he blurted out, ignoring Tommy's attempt to silence him. "They're using us to set up distribution routes, but it's not just drugs. They're moving people too. Trafficking. We didn't sign up for that." 3 vehicles, 30 seconds out, Mike reported tensely. Jack made a quick decision. "If you want out, now's your chance. Sarah will take you somewhere safe, but you have to move now." The young riders looked at each other, years of friendship, and shared history passing between them in a silent exchange. Finally, Tommy nodded. "We're out," he said firmly. "This ain't what the club was supposed to be about." As Sarah quickly led the 2 young men to safety, Jack prepared to face the approaching professionals. The information they'd just gained confirmed his worst fears about the operation, but it also gave them leverage they hadn't expected. The upcoming confrontation would be dangerous, but now they had something even more valuable than evidence. They had insiders willing to testify. The 3 motorcycles thundered into the sanctuary, their riders moving with the practiced coordination that marked them as professionals. Unlike the local gang members, these men carried themselves with military precision, their movements calculated and controlled. They formed a triangle formation as they approached the barn, cutting off potential escape routes. Jack stood his ground, appearing calm and alone, though his team was strategically positioned around the property. Shadow remained on the ridge, his dark form a silent sentinel watching the scene unfold. The Stallion's presence seemed to unsettle the newcomers who kept glancing up at him between scanning the surroundings. "Your message, boys, seemed to have gotten lost," Jack called out as the riders dismounted. The leader, a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes, stepped forward. Unlike the Devil's Hand members, he wore no club colors, just tactical black riding gear. "Where are they?" the man demanded, his voice carrying a hint of an Eastern European accent. "Safe," Jack replied simply, "along with enough evidence to expose your entire operation. Trafficking, smuggling routes, professional contractors. Quite a sophisticated setup you've got going, much bigger than a local motorcycle club." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're involving yourself in, old man. This is much bigger than your little horse sanctuary." "Oh, I think I understand perfectly," Jack responded, catching Mike's signal that indicated their surveillance was capturing everything. "Devil's Hand is just a front, providing local cover for your real operation. Tell me, does the club leadership know they're just pawns in your game?" The 3 men spread out slightly, their hands never far from their concealed weapons. Jack noticed their tactical positioning. These weren't ordinary criminals, they were trained operators. "What do you want?" the leader asked, his tone calculating. "Everyone has a price." Jack allowed himself a small smile. You know what your mistake was? Thinking this was just about horses. But this place, Thunder Ridge, it's not just a sanctuary. It's a symbol of healing, of protection for those who need it. And the people who protect it, we've faced worse threats than you in places a lot more dangerous than Montana. As if on cue, Carlos and Dave emerged from their hidden positions, their military bearing matching that of the intruders. Sarah's voice came through their comms, confirming that Tommy and Marcus were secure and providing information to Sheriff Chen. The leader reassessed the situation, recognizing the change in dynamics. You're interfering with something you can't stop, he warned. We have connections, resources, and we have everything, Jack interrupted. Every movement, every shipment, every face and license plate, plus 2 insider witnesses ready to testify. Your operation is compromised, and your local cover is falling apart. Shadow suddenly descended from the ridge, moving with powerful grace to stand near Jack. The stallion's presence added to the tension, his intelligent eyes fixed on the intruders. But I'm going to give you a choice, Jack continued, his voice hard. The same choice your local boys just took. Walk away. Take your operation somewhere else, because this territory, it's protected by people who've spent their lives fighting threats bigger than you. The leader's hand twitched toward his weapon, but he froze as he realized the red dots of laser sights had appeared on his chest and those of his men. Mike's voice carried across the property. Federal tactical team inbound 2 minutes out. Your local police might be compromised, Jack explained. But did you really think a group of combat veterans wouldn't have connections of our own? That sanctuary you saw at Peterson's place? We've been broadcasting everything to multiple agencies for hours. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, growing louder by the second. The 3 men exchanged glances, their professional training telling them the situation was lost. This isn't over, the leader growled, but he and his men were already backing toward their bikes. It is for you, Jack replied. And when word gets out about how you've been using Devil's Hand, about the trafficking, about everything, well, let's just say your local cover won't be very happy about being played. The 3 men mounted their motorcycles, their movements still controlled, but now tinged with urgency. As they roared away from the sanctuary, the first federal vehicles began arriving, their lights painting the pre-dawn sky in flashing red and blue. Sarah rejoined the group, reporting that Tommy and Marcus were already providing detailed statements to federal agents. The young gang members' testimony, combined with the surveillance evidence, would be enough to not just shut down the trafficking operation, but to expose the corruption that had protected it. Shadow nudged Jack's shoulder gently, the stallion's presence a reminder of why they'd fought so hard. This wasn't just about protecting horses anymore. It had become about protecting their entire community from those who would exploit it. Well done, boy, Jack murmured, patting Shadow's neck. You played your part perfectly. As federal agents swarmed the property, Jack gathered his team. They had won this battle, but they knew their work wasn't finished. Thunder Ridge had become more than a sanctuary. It was now a symbol of resistance against those who would prey on the vulnerable, whether human or animal. The sun began to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant golds and purples. Shadow returned to his herd, his proud stance reflecting the victory they had achieved. The sanctuary would continue its mission of healing, but now with an added purpose, standing strong against any who would threaten the peace and safety of their community. In the days following the confrontation, Thunder Ridge Sanctuary hummed with renewed purpose and activity. Federal agents had set up a temporary command post in the old breeding barn, coordinating raids across 3 states based on the intelligence Jack's team had gathered. The evidence from their surveillance operation, combined with Tommy and Marcus's testimony, had exposed a trafficking network far larger than anyone had initially suspected. Jack stood at his usual spot on the porch, watching Shadow lead his heard through their morning routine. The Stallion had become something of a local legend, with stories of his role in confronting Devil's Hand spreading through the veteran community. Sarah had even incorporated the tale into her therapy sessions, using it to illustrate themes of courage, resilience, and standing up against intimidation. "Latest report from the FBI task force," Mike announced, joining Jack with a fresh cup of coffee. "They've closed down 3 more staging areas, all using the same pattern we discovered at Peterson's place. The trafficking ring was using motorcycle clubs all across the region as cover." "And Devil's Hand?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer from the local news. "Clubs falling apart," Mike confirmed. "Once the members learned they were being used to facilitate human trafficking, most of them walked away. The few who tried to stick with the outside operators are being rounded up in the federal sweeps." Shadow lifted his head, nickering a greeting as Sarah's truck pulled up the drive. She wasn't alone. Tommy and Marcus sat in the cab with her, looking nervous but determined. The 2 young men had spent the past few days in protective custody, providing detailed information about the criminal operation they'd unwittingly become part of. "They wanted to come back," Sarah explained as they approached the porch. "Said they had something to say." The former gang members stood awkwardly before Jack, their tough guy images replaced by genuine remorse. Tommy spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of his recent decisions. "We wanted to thank you," he said, meeting Jack's eyes. "Not just for protecting us, but for showing us what we were really part of, what we were helping happen to people." "It ain't right." Marcus nodded in agreement. "The FBI folks, they said we might be able to help other clubs that are being used the same way, keep other guys from getting pulled into something they don't understand." Jack studied the young men, seeing the potential that had nearly been wasted. "The sanctuary always needs volunteers," he said finally. "Working with these horses, it has a way of helping people find their way back to who they really are." The offer surprised them, but both Tommy and Marcus broke into genuine smiles. Shadow chose that moment to approach the fence, his intelligent eyes studying the young men who had once been part of the threat to his home. "He remembers you," Jack noted, watching the Stallion's calm demeanor, "and he seems to think you deserve a second chance. That's good enough for me." As if understanding the significance of the moment, Shadow extended his nose toward the former gang members. Tentatively, they reached out to touch him, the simple gesture symbolizing their own journey toward redemption. The sanctuary was returning to its primary mission of healing, but with a deeper understanding of what that really meant. Veterans still came for therapy sessions, finding peace in working with the horses, but now they also found inspiration in the story of how a community of warriors had stood together to protect something precious. Carlos and Dave had established a training program, teaching other ranches and sanctuaries how to protect themselves without resorting to violence. Their methods, combining military experience with a deep respect for the healing power of working with animals, were being adopted across the region. "We've had 12 new applications for the therapy program," Sarah reported, reviewing her tablet. "Word's getting out about what happened here. Veterans are drawn to the idea of a place that combines healing with purpose." Jack watched as Tommy and Marcus followed Sarah toward the barn for their orientation. Shadow had returned to his herd, but his presence seemed to linger in the way he had bridged the gap between past and future, between threat and redemption. "You know," Mike mused, "when you started this place, it was about giving horses a second chance. Never figured it would end up giving people the same opportunity." Jack smiled, remembering his own journey from combat veteran to sanctuary owner. Maybe that was the point all along. Every creature deserves a chance to find their true purpose, to heal and to help others heal. The morning sun cast long shadows. Across Thunder Ridge, highlighting the peaceful scene of horses grazing and veterans finding their way forward. The sanctuary had faced its challenge and emerged stronger, its mission expanded but its heart unchanged. Shadow stood proudly on his ridge, silhouetted against the mountains that had given the sanctuary its name. He was more than just a rescued horse now. He had become a symbol of the strength that comes from standing together against darkness, of the power of second chances, and of the unexpected ways that healing can transform both the healed and the healers. The story of Thunder Ridge and its stallion would be told for years to come, not just as a tale of confronting evil, but as a reminder that true strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through force, but through the courage to stand up for what's right, and the wisdom to offer redemption to those who seek it. 3 months after the confrontation that had transformed Thunder Ridge, the sanctuary was hosting its first major event since the incident. Dozens of trucks and cars lined the property's main drive as veterans, law enforcement officers, and community members gathered to celebrate the inauguration of the sanctuary's expanded mission, the Thunder Ridge Veterans and Recovery Program. Jack stood at the podium they'd set up near the main paddock, Shadow grazing contentedly nearby. The stallion had seemed to sense the importance of the day, staying close to the gathering rather than leading his herd to the far pastures as he usually did. In the audience, Tommy and Marcus sat among the other program participants, their presence a testament to the sanctuary's power to change lives. "When I started Thunder Ridge," Jack began, his voice carrying across the attentive crowd, "it was supposed to be a simple retirement project, a place where rescued horses could find peace and where veterans could heal. I never imagined it would become something so much more." Sarah sat in the front row, flanked by Carlos and Dave. The three of them had been instrumental in developing the sanctuary's new programs, combining their military experience with their understanding of trauma and recovery. "What happened here 3 months ago taught us something important," Jack continued. "It showed us that healing isn't just about finding peace, it's about finding purpose. Every person and every animal here has a story of overcoming adversity, of fighting back against those who would cause harm." In the paddock behind him, Shadow lifted his head, his ears forward as if listening to Jack's words. The stallion's story had become legendary in the veteran community, inspiring others to see the parallel between their own battles and his journey from rescued horse to protector. Today, we're not just a horse sanctuary anymore, we're a community, a place where veterans can find not just healing, but purpose, where rescued horses help rescue people, and where second chances lead to new beginnings. Mike, operating his drone overhead, captured the scene for their documentary project. The story of Thunder Ridge's stand against the trafficking ring had attracted national attention, leading to increased support for veteran-run sanctuaries across the country. Our new programs wouldn't be possible without the support of many people, Jack acknowledged. Sheriff Chen, who's here today, stood with us when we exposed the corruption in her department, the FBI task force that helped us shut down the trafficking operation. But most importantly, the veterans and community members who proved that standing together against evil is stronger than standing alone. In the months since the confrontation, Thunder Ridge had expanded its facilities and programs. The old Peterson Place, seized in the federal investigation, had been donated to the sanctuary. It was being renovated into a training center where veterans could learn ranch management and animal care skills. Tommy and Marcus, Jack gestured to the former gang members, showed us that redemption is possible when people are given the chance to choose a better path. They've become valuable members of our program, helping others understand how easy it is to be led astray and how powerful it is to find your way back. The two young men straightened in their seats, pride replacing their former shame. They had become instrumental in the sanctuary's youth outreach program, using their experience to steer others away from the paths they had nearly taken. Shadow, Jack turned to the stallion, who seemed to respond to his name, taught us all that courage comes in many forms. His stand against those who threatened his herd inspired us to stand against those who threatened our community. Today, he continues to help veterans find their own courage to face their battles. The stallion moved closer to the podium, his presence adding weight to Jack's words. Several of the therapy program participants smiled, recognizing the horse that had helped them through their darkest moments. So today, as we officially launch our expanded programs, remember this. Thunder Ridge isn't just about horses helping people or people helping horses. It's about building a community where strength comes from standing together, where healing comes from helping others, and where every sunset brings the promise of a new beginning. The crowd applauded as Jack concluded his speech. Shadow, as if understanding his cue, lifted his head and let out a resonant neigh that echoed across the valley. The other horses in the sanctuary responded, creating a chorus that brought smiles to every face. After the ceremony, as people mingled and toured the facilities, Jack found himself back at his usual spot on the porch. Sarah joined him, watching as veterans and horses connected in the paddocks below. "You know," she said, "when you first told me about turning this place into a sanctuary, I thought you were just looking for a quiet retirement." Jack chuckled, watching as Shadow guided a nervous new rescue horse toward a veteran who had arrived that morning. "I guess some of us aren't meant for quiet retirements. There's too much work to be done, too many people and animals needing help." The sanctuary was alive with purpose. Its mission evolved, but its heart unchanged. As the sun began to set over Thunder Ridge, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Jack knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their ongoing story of healing, courage, and redemption. The success of Thunder Ridge's expanded programs quickly spread beyond Montana's borders. Within weeks of the inauguration ceremony, similar sanctuaries across the country began reaching out, seeking guidance on implementing their own veteran-focused recovery programs. Jack found himself becoming an unexpected ambassador for a movement that combined animal rescue with veteran rehabilitation. On this particular morning, Jack stood watching as Tommy and Marcus worked with a new group of veterans in the round pen. The former gang members had proven to be naturals at helping others connect with the horses, their own journey from darkness to redemption giving them unique insight into the healing process. "Remember," Tommy was saying to a young veteran who had arrived the previous day, "horses can sense everything you're feeling. They don't care about your past or your mistakes. They just care about who you are right now, in this moment." Shadow grazed nearby, occasionally lifting his head to observe the session. The stallion had developed an uncanny ability to sense which veterans needed his presence most, often approaching those struggling with their deepest traumas. Today, his attention seemed focused on a female veteran who stood slightly apart from the group, her body language speaking of hypervigilance and unease. "That's Maria Rodriguez," Sarah explained quietly to Jack, joining him at the fence. "2 tours in Iraq. She hasn't spoken much since arriving, but Shadow hasn't taken his eyes off her." As if hearing his name, Shadow lifted his head and began walking purposefully toward Maria. The other veterans and horses seemed to fade into the background as the stallion approached her with gentle determination. Maria remained frozen in place, her eyes wide but unafraid, as Shadow stopped before her. "It's remarkable," Mike commented, lowering his camera. He had been documenting the sanctuary's success stories for their outreach program. "Every time I think I understand what's happening here, I see something that surprises me." They watched as Maria slowly lifted her hand to Shadow's nose. The moment of connection was profound, and those present could see the subtle shift in her posture as some of her tension began to ease. Shadow remained perfectly still, allowing her to find comfort in her own time. "We've got visitors," Carlos called out softly from his position near the main gate. A convoy of 3 vehicles was approaching the sanctuary, led by a familiar police cruiser. Sheriff Chen stepped out of her vehicle, followed by several official-looking individuals in suits. "Jack!" she called out with a smile. "Hope we're not interrupting. These folks are from the National Veterans Affairs Office. They've been hearing about what you're doing here." The officials introduced themselves, their initial formality softening as they observed the scene before them. Maria was now walking slowly alongside Shadow, her hand resting lightly on his neck, while Tommy and Marcus continued working with the other veterans in the round pen. "We've been monitoring your program's success rate," the lead official explained. "The combination of animal therapy and veteran-to-veteran support is showing remarkable results. We're interested in establishing similar programs nationwide." Jack exchanged glances with his team. They had built something special at Thunder Ridge, something that went beyond traditional therapy or rehabilitation programs. It was a place where healing happened naturally, through the connection between humans and horses, between warriors past and present. "It's not just about the programs," Jack explained, gesturing toward Maria and Shadow. "It's about creating a space where both animals and people can find their way back to themselves. Every horse here has a story of survival, just like every veteran. They heal each other." The officials spent the morning touring the facility, watching therapy sessions, and speaking with program participants. They seemed particularly impressed by Tommy and Marcus's role, seeing the value in having peer counselors who had faced their own battles with darkness. "Your success with reintegrating former gang members is particularly interesting," one official noted. "The combination of veteran mentorship and animal therapy seems to provide a powerful alternative to traditional rehabilitation programs." As the day progressed, Shadow maintained his vigil near Maria, who had begun to speak quietly to him about her experiences in Iraq. Sarah watched from a distance, understanding that sometimes the best therapy happened in these unstructured moments of connection. "We'd like to establish Thunder Ridge as a model program," the lead official announced during their closing meeting. "Provide funding and resources to help you expand and use your methods to create similar sanctuaries across the country." Jack looked around at his team, Sarah, Mike, Carlos, Dave, Tommy, and Marcus, seeing the pride and purpose in their faces. What they had built here was more than just a program or a facility. It was a testament to the healing power of purpose, community, and the unspoken bond between humans and horses. "We'll help however we can," Jack agreed, "but on one condition. These places have to be more than just facilities. They need to be sanctuaries in the truest sense, places where both animals and people can find safety, purpose, and healing." As the officials departed, Jack walked out to where Shadow and Maria were still communing quietly. The stallion acknowledged his approach with a soft nickering, while Maria offered her first small smile since arriving at Thunder Ridge. "He knows," she said softly, running her hand along Shadow's powerful neck. "Somehow, he knows exactly what it feels like to carry the weight of survival." Jack nodded, understanding that this was what made Thunder Ridge special, not its programs or methods, but these moments of genuine connection and healing. As the sun began to set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the sanctuary, he knew that their work here was far from finished. It was, in many ways, just beginning. 1 year after Thunder Ridge's transformation, the sanctuary had become a beacon of hope for veterans and rescued horses alike. The success of their program had inspired the creation of similar sanctuaries in 12 other states, each following the model that Jack and his team had developed. But on this particular morning, as Jack made his way to the barn, he found himself reflecting on how it all began, with one stallion who refused to be broken. Shadow stood at the highest point of the ridge, his powerful frame silhouetted against the dawn sky. Below him, 20 new horses grazed peacefully, recent rescues from a shuttered racing facility. The stallion had taken each new arrival under his protection, showing the same leadership that had helped save Thunder Ridge during the confrontation with Devil's Hand. "Morning, boss," Tommy called out, emerging from the barn with fresh hay. The former gang member had become the sanctuary's head trainer, his natural ability with troubled horses matching his skill at connecting with veterans struggling to find their way. "Got some interesting news from Marcus." Jack paused, noting the subtle tension in Tommy's voice. "Everything okay?" "He's been working with the FBI task force, tracking some chatter about what's left of Devil's Hand. Seems the professional contractors who were running the trafficking operation have resurfaced in Nevada. They're trying to set up new routes, using different clubs as cover." Before Jack could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Sarah's truck led a convoy of 3 horse trailers up the sanctuary's main drive, returning from their latest rescue mission. They had received a call 2 days ago about a group of Mustangs being held in deplorable conditions by an illegal breeding operation. Shadow's posture changed immediately, his attention fixed on the trailers as they parked near the quarantine paddocks. The stallion had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when new rescues needed his particular brand of leadership and comfort. "Got 12 new ones," Sarah reported as she climbed down from her truck. "Most are in rough shape, but there's one." She trailed off, glancing at the last trailer. "You need to see this one, Jack." They moved to the trailer's rear doors, and Sarah slowly opened them. Inside, standing with quiet dignity despite his obvious injuries, was a steel-grey stallion that could have been Shadow's twin. The horse's coat was dull and marked with scars, but his eyes held the same indomitable spirit that Jack had first seen in Shadow years ago. "Found him protecting the others," Sarah explained softly. "The breeder had tried to break him, but he wouldn't submit. Kept placing himself between the abusers and the weaker horses, taking the punishment meant for them." As they spoke, Shadow descended from his ridge, approaching the trailer with purposeful strides. The new stallion noticed him, and for a moment the 2 horses regarded each other with an intensity that made everyone fall silent. It was as if they recognized in each other a shared story of courage and resilience. "What are the chances?" Mike murmured, capturing the moment on camera. 2 stallions, both protecting others at their own expense, both refusing to be broken. "No such thing as coincidence," Carlos commented, joining them with Dave. "Not in our line of work." The new stallion, whom they would later name Warrior, was carefully unloaded and led to a private paddock. Shadow remained nearby, his presence seeming to calm the traumatized horse. It was a scene that perfectly embodied Thunder Ridge's mission. The healed becoming healers, the protected becoming protectors. Later that evening, as the team gathered in the main office to discuss the day's events, Maria, now a full-time staff member, brought up the news about the trafficking operation's resurgence. "We can't let them establish new routes," she said firmly. "Not after everything we've seen, everything we've learned about their operation." Jack nodded, studying the maps Mike had pulled up on their screens. "The other sanctuaries need to be warned. If they're trying to rebuild their network, they'll likely target areas where they think they won't meet resistance." "Already on it," Marcus replied, hanging up his phone. "FBI is coordinating with sanctuary owners in 3 states. They're implementing our security protocols, setting up surveillance networks." Tommy leaned forward, his expression serious. "These guys don't know it yet, but the landscape has changed. Every sanctuary we've helped establish is run by veterans, people who understand how to recognize and counter threats like this." And each one has their own shadow, Sarah added, glancing out the window where the two stallions stood in adjacent paddocks, their silent communication continuing. Their own symbols of resilience and courage. Jack absorbed the information, feeling a familiar sense of purpose settling over him. Thunder Ridge had evolved from a simple horse sanctuary into something far more significant, a model for combining healing with protection, recovery with vigilance. Set up a conference call with the other sanctuary leaders, he decided. If these traffickers want to try rebuilding their operation, they need to understand that they're not just dealing with one sanctuary anymore. They're facing a network of warriors, both human and equine, who know their tactics and won't back down. As the team began coordinating their response, Jack stepped outside to check on Shadow and Warrior. The two stallions had positioned themselves like sentinels, watching over their respective herds while maintaining their peculiar connection. In their stance, Jack saw the future of Thunder Ridge and all the sanctuaries it had inspired, places where the strength of the warrior spirit could be channeled into protection and healing. The network of sanctuaries that Thunder Ridge had inspired proved more formidable than the trafficking operation had anticipated. Within weeks of implementing their coordinated surveillance system, 3 attempted infiltrations were identified and thwarted. The professional contractors, accustomed to dealing with isolated ranches and intimidated locals, found themselves facing an organized resistance of combat veterans and law enforcement officials. At Thunder Ridge, Shadow and Warrior had developed a remarkable partnership. The two stallions worked in tandem, their different approaches complementing each other as they helped new arrivals, both equine and human, adjust to life at the sanctuary. Where Shadow's strength was in gentle guidance, Warrior excelled at helping the most traumatized cases find their courage again. "It's like watching 2 seasoned sergeants running their platoon," Carlos remarked one morning, as the stallions worked together to integrate a particularly skittish new rescue into the herd. Each knows exactly what the other is going to do before they do it. Jack watched from the observation post they'd built on the ridge, monitoring both the horses below and the security feeds from their expanded surveillance network. The sanctuary had grown significantly, now encompassing the former Peterson property and several adjacent parcels of land that had been donated by supporters. "Movement on the western perimeter," Mike's voice crackled through the radio. "Single vehicle approaching slowly." The sanctuary's security protocols had become second nature to everyone. Sarah and Maria quickly moved the therapy group they were working with to a secure area, while Tommy and Marcus took up observation positions near the main gate. Through their cameras, they watched as a battered pickup truck came to a stop at the sanctuary's entrance. The driver, an elderly man, sat for a long moment before slowly stepping out. His body language spoke of exhaustion and defeat rather than threat. "I'll handle this," Jack said into his radio, making his way down to the gate. As he approached, he could see the man more clearly, weathered face, calloused hands, the bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime working with horses. "Can I help you?" Jack called out, maintaining a safe distance. The man looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "Name's Bill Henderson. I heard about what you folks do here. What you did, standing up to those traffickers." He paused, swallowing hard. "I need your help." Over the next hour, Bill's story emerged. He owned a small ranch in Nevada, one of the areas where the trafficking operation had tried to re-establish itself. They had approached him about using his property as a waypoint, making threats when he refused. Now they were pressuring other ranchers in the area, using intimidation and violence to secure new routes. "We've been fighting them off," Bill explained, "but they're wearing us down. Some folks have already sold out, moved away. Can't blame them, with families to protect." Shadow and Warrior had moved closer to the fence during Bill's story, their presence seeming to give the old rancher strength. As he spoke, Jack noticed how Bill's eyes kept returning to the stallions, seeing in them perhaps a reflection of the strength he needed to find. "Show me on the map exactly where this is happening," Jack said, spreading out a detailed regional map on the hood of Bill's truck. As the rancher pointed out the locations of recent incidents, Jack could see the pattern emerging. The trafficking operation was trying to establish a corridor that would bypass the major highways where law enforcement had increased its presence. "Mike!" Jack called over the radio. "Get me a conference line with the other sanctuary leaders and contact Sheriff Chen. We need to coordinate with the FBI task force." Within hours, Thunder Ridge's command center was buzzing with activity. Video feeds showed similar meetings taking place at sanctuaries across 3 states, as the network of veterans mobilized to address this new threat. "They're targeting isolated ranches," Maria observed, analyzing the pattern of incidents. "Places without strong community connections, where owners might be vulnerable to pressure. Then we help them build those connections," Jack decided. "Show them they're not alone." The plan came together quickly, drawing on the combined experience of dozens of veterans and law enforcement officials. Each sanctuary would reach out to ranches in their region, offering support, training, and integration into their security network. The FBI would provide additional resources and coordination, while local law enforcement would increase patrols in vulnerable areas. "It's not just about stopping the traffickers," Sarah pointed out. "It's about building a community strong enough that they can't get a foothold in the first place." Bill listened to the plans with growing hope, his exhaustion giving way to determination. "When they first showed up," he said, "I thought I had to face them alone. Never imagined there were folks like you out there ready to help." As the sun began to set over Thunder Ridge, Jack walked with Bill to the main paddock where Shadow and Warrior stood watch over their herd. The 2 stallions approached the fence, their powerful presence a reminder of the strength that comes from standing together. "You're not alone anymore," Jack told Bill, watching as the old rancher reached out to touch Shadow's nose. "None of us are. That's what Thunder Ridge is really about, building a network of strength, a community that protects its own." The trafficking operation had made a critical mistake in trying to rebuild their network. They had assumed that the resistance they'd encountered at Thunder Ridge was isolated, not realizing that it had inspired a movement. Now, as Jack looked at the determined faces around him, veterans, ranchers, law enforcement officers all, united in purpose, he knew that this time the response would be even stronger. The final showdown with the trafficking operation unfolded not with a violent confrontation, but through the quiet strength of a united community. Over the following weeks, Thunder Ridge's network of sanctuaries implemented their coordinated response, systematically closing off every route and safe house the criminals tried to establish. Bill Henderson's ranch became the focal point of their efforts in Nevada. Working with local veterans and law enforcement, they transformed the isolated property into a hub of resistance. Security systems were installed, volunteers organized, patrols, and most importantly, neighboring ranches were brought together, their individual vulnerabilities transformed into collective strength. Shadow and Warrior seemed to sense the importance of what was happening. The 2 stallions had taken to standing watch together on Thunder Ridge's highest point, their vigilant presence becoming a symbol of the sanctuary's mission. When a group of Nevada ranchers visited to learn about the sanctuary's methods, the sight of the 2 powerful horses working in perfect harmony left a lasting impression. "It's like they're showing us how it's done," Tommy remarked, watching, as the stallions coordinated their movements to guide a new rescue horse, working together, trusting each other, protecting what matters. The trafficking operations' response to the growing resistance was predictable. They escalated their intimidation tactics, But this time, every threat was met with a coordinated response. When they targeted a small ranch in Idaho, they found not just the owner waiting for them, but a network of veterans and supporters ready to stand together. "They don't understand what they're really fighting," Sarah observed during one of their strategy meetings. "They think it's about territory or roots or profit. But it's about community, about healing, about standing up for something bigger than ourselves." The evidence gathered through their surveillance network proved devastating to the operation's attempts to rebuild. Local law enforcement, supported by federal agencies, conducted synchronized raids across 3 states. The professional contractors, who had once operated with impunity, found their every move anticipated and countered. Jack received the news of the operation's final collapse while working with a group of veterans in Thunder Ridge's main paddock. Shadow and Warrior stood nearby, their presence helping a particularly traumatized veteran find his voice again. "It's over," Mike reported, showing Jack the incoming messages from their network. "FBI just picked up the last of the key players. The evidence from our surveillance operations was instrumental in breaking down their entire command structure." The victory wasn't celebrated with fanfare or proclamations. Instead, it was marked by a quiet gathering at Thunder Ridge, where veterans, ranchers, and law enforcement officials came together to reflect on what they had achieved. Bill Henderson, standing taller and stronger than when he first arrived seeking help, spoke for many when he addressed the group. "What you've built here isn't just about horses or healing or even fighting back against criminals," he said, his voice carrying across the attentive crowd. "It's about remembering who we are when we stand together. These horses," he gestured, to Shadow and Warrior, "they never forgot that strength comes from unity, from protecting each other. Maybe it took them to remind us." The expanded network of sanctuaries continued to grow, each one adapting Thunder Ridge's model to serve their local communities. The combination of veteran support, animal therapy, and community protection proved powerful, creating spaces where healing and strength reinforced each other. Sarah's therapy programs evolved to include working with law enforcement officers and first responders, recognizing that they too needed places to find peace and renewal. Tommy and Marcus developed a youth outreach program, using their own journey from darkness to redemption to help others find their way. One evening, as the sun set over Thunder Ridge, Jack found himself back where it all began, watching Shadow on his ridge. The Stallion had been joined by Warrior, and together they surveyed their domain, 2 guardians whose strength had helped inspire a movement. "You know," Mike said, joining Jack at the fence, "when we first started this, I thought we were just building a sanctuary for horses. Never imagined we'd end up creating something that would change so many lives." Jack nodded, understanding that Thunder Ridge had become more than just a place. It was a testament to the power of healing, community, and purpose. The horses they had rescued had helped rescue others in turn, creating a cycle of renewal that continued to ripple outward. As darkness settled over the sanctuary, Shadow and Warrior led their combined herds back to the safety of the paddocks. Their movements were synchronized, their leadership clear and purposeful. In their example, Jack saw the future of Thunder Ridge and all it had inspired. A future where strength and healing went hand in hand, where communities stood together against darkness, and where every sunset brought the promise of new beginnings. The story of Thunder Ridge, its stallions, and the veterans who found their purpose there would be told for years to come, not just as a tale of standing up to evil, but as a reminder that true strength comes from unity, that healing happens when we help others heal, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through force, but through the courage to stand together and the wisdom to choose love over fear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.